Okay, our next lecture is on the menstrual cycle, and also we're going to be looking at the cleavage diagram, which you will need to know for the exam, so you should have printed off a lecture sheet and the cleavage diagram. So the menstrual cycle, what is the purpose of the menstrual cycle? Is to prepare the female body for pregnancy. And we're going to say, and we're going to base all of our numbers and how long each phase lasts on an average cycle lasts about 28 days. That's average, knowing that some women are fewer and some are more than that, but this is average. The 4 phases of the cycle. We're going to start with menstruation. The second phase is the follicular phase. Third, ovulation. Fourth, luteal phase. So phase 1, menstruation. This would be the first 5 days of the cycle. During this time, the endometrium, which is the inside or the inner lining of the uterus, is being shed or sloughed off. So these cells and extra blood is being passed out of the body. So prior to this, it has become very thick, rich blood supply so the embryo can implant itself. Phase 2 is the follicular phase. So this will begin day 6 and will continue for 7 days after that. There's some hormones involved with the follicular phase. First hormone, hence the name follicular, is the follicle stimulating hormone, abbreviated FSH. This is going to be released from the pituitary gland deep within the brain. So what this is going to do is it's going to cause something called the follicle, which is just a group of cells, to form and protect the egg. And this is taking place inside the ovary. The other thing that the follicle stimulating hormone does is it's going to trigger estrogen to be produced by the ovaries. So if we look at this diagram, we can start here at the top, the ovarian histology, which is what are the cells doing. So here's my follicle. You can see that it's growing in size. This red line around is the follicle. Body temperature is pretty much regulated, stays the same. When I look at the hormones, you can see that the blue line is the estradiol, which is a form of estrogen, and then the black line here is progesterone, the red line is the follicle stimulating hormone, and the green line is the luteinizing hormone. So you can see, comparing the 4 that start off, estradiol, there's more estradiol in the female, and then progesterone, FSH, and then the luteinizing hormone. So as we go through the follicular phase, we can see the 2 that's increasing would be the luteinizing hormone, and then eventually when we get closer to ovulation is the luteinizing hormone. If we come here to the bottom, we can see the endometrial or the endometrium, what's happening. This is showing that menstruation is occurring, and then now it's starting to increase as those hormones increase. So the estrogen is going to have 2 effects. One, the endometrium is going to thicken. We saw that toward the end on the last slide. And as the blood, also the estrogen is going to enter the bloodstream. When it does, it's going to signal the pituitary gland, remember that's in the brain, to release an additional hormone called the luteinizing hormone. This is going to trigger the egg inside the ovary to mature. So the estrogen does 2 things, endometrium thickening and releasing of the luteinizing hormone. The third phase is ovulation. This is when the egg is going to rupture from the ovary and then go and travel down the fallopian tube. It will stay within the fallopian tube for 4 days. If sperm is present and can be fertilized, then it will go through the process of cleavage, which we'll get to in just a moment, and go through the cleavage, the gastrula, blastula, and it'll implant in the uterine wall. Okay, going back to our chart for ovulation, this is the follicle, this is the egg that's ruptured. You can see toward the end of ovulation, my temperature is going to slightly increase. The hormones, the luteinizing hormone, here I have a peak in the follicle stimulating hormone, a spike in the luteinizing hormone, and there's a slight increase, this red line, of the follicle stimulating hormone. At the bottom, for our endometrium, endometrial histology, you can see that the endometrium is starting to thicken as it moves toward or through ovulation. The fourth phase is luteal phase. This will last the longest. It takes about 13 days. The two hormones that are predominant would be the estradiol and especially the progesterone. It's going to cause that endometrium to thicken even more because it's preparing for a possible embryo to embed itself right here. So we have something called the corpus luteum. We'll get to that in the next slide. Have a spike in our temperature. Progesterone is now the greatest percent of hormones in the body, followed by the estradiol. We can see we have less of the follicle stimulating hormone, and again it is the longest of the cycle, the menstrual cycle, and this is when the endometrium is going to be the thickest. When the cycle starts over, if there's no egg that's been implanted or the blastocyst, then it will continue through and come back to the beginning and go through menstruation and sloughing off. So two possible routes for the egg. One, if the egg has been fertilized, then that takes place in the fallopian tube. It will then travel and embed itself into the uterine wall. That's why it needs to be thick. That endometrium needs to be thick. If fertilization does not occur at the end of 13 days, progesterone level will drop, and the egg and the endometrium will be sloughed off through the process of menstruation. Okay, so let's go to our cleavage diagram. So I've got a clear image on the next one of our ovary, and this is the same on both sides. There's just been a cross section of that. So this is our ovary, corpus luteum. You can always tell it's one of the largest structures, kind of an irregular shape. There's no definite core with a little dot in the middle, which is the actual egg with the nucleus. The follicle, the maturing follicle, so as it gets closer to ovulation, okay, that needs to be the largest maturing follicle. Ovulation is always rupturing of that follicle and the egg is expelled into the fallopian tube. There's a few ways to tell some of these structures apart. Okay, as we enter the fallopian tube, we have a secondary oocyte. Remember, oo is egg cell. Here is fertilization. We have the union of the egg and the sperm. These are obviously sperm cells. Now the next two, you cannot tell which is the egg, which is the sperm, so if you mix these up on your labeling, that does not matter. The only way you could really tell is to get inside and look at the chromosomes. But even then, if it's a sperm cell and it has an X, you might not know. You would think it would be an egg. So it's really difficult to tell from these drawings. Once these two unite, it is then called a zygote. Now we go through the process of cleavage to where the cells are now rapidly going through mitosis and dividing. So here's 2 cells, 4 cells, 8 cells. It will continue on until it goes to a morula, which is a ball of 32 cells. It's not hollow yet, but it's a ball. And if you track back, you can see it just entered the uterus. It's right here. Then here is my hollow ball. This is my blastocyst, and it goes through the blastula stage. And if you use blastocyst or blastula, either one is fine. And then once it implants into the uterine wall, it's an implanted blastocyst. And then it'll go through gastrula and the membranes will start to form, and we cover that on embryonic development. So by the time that it's been fertilized over here, traveled down the fallopian tube, implanted itself in the uterine wall, it takes about 7 days to do that. Okay, let's do a close-up of the ovary. It was a little hard on that last drawing to see what was going on. So let's start here. This is menstruation, so labeled number 1. Number 2, we're looking at this last cell. This is the maturing follicle. Notice how it increased in size, and the follicle is this yellow ring around the outside edge. Continues to mature. Now it's completely mature. Look how much larger it is. You can always tell ovulation. You have the rupturing of the follicle. This is the egg. It's going to enter the fallopian tube. Here's the corpus luteum. Now you notice that there is no egg inside, and it's a very irregular shape, and it's about the same size as the matured follicle. And then finally it will deteriorate and it will start the process over again. So the corpus luteum is really essential, especially with mammals. It helps to establish and maintain pregnancy in females, and the reason why is it secretes such a high level of progesterone. So if we go back to our labeling here, when we looked at the corpus luteum, we can see this high or this spike in progesterone, which is directly linked to the thickening of the endometrium, which is the reason for the menstrual cycle, so that that embryo can implant itself into the uterine wall. Well, that concludes our lecture, and like always, feel free to review this. If you do have any questions, you can ask me in class. Thank you very much.